day going forward. There we go. So good morning, everybody. I always love the beginning of a Facebook Live because you never know if you're live and you have to do the preamble bit and you're like, am I live? But we are live. So if you are watching, give us a thumbs up, give us a hello. If you've got any comments, pop them in the comments so that we can interact with you throughout. But I'm here with the fabulous Katie Nutting. And Katie, we are going to be talking about something that really impacts couples, which is relationship with money,
Yeah.
and how that impacts that. But before that, Katie, tell everyone a little bit about who you are.
So morning, everyone. Apologies for the background. I said to Ali, I'm on the move today, trying to see some
All
clients
right.
on the go. So I'm one of the financial planning directors at Schroders Personal Wealth. What I do is help individuals and business owners to really plan their finances. And when it comes to relationships, I also do a lot of work with people that are going through a divorce, sadly, and then trying to pick up a new relationship with money where it might have previously been delegated to another party. So I
Hmm.
have lots and lots of experience of working with individuals and couples to try and map out what that financial future looks like for them.
So we know from the work that we do, and sorry if I'm just checking my phone regularly. I'm going to move it somewhere so I can maybe see the comments so I'm not looking away, just so I can check. But we know that money can be a very contentious issue.
Yeah.
And in this group, we talk about all things that impact relationships. And I can tell you as a therapist, that this comes up probably 80% of the time is one of the key reasons why people are in the space. Something has happened, maybe something else has happened, but it boils down to the money, the finances, who's getting what, who's in charge of what, because we have very different relationships with money, don't we, that we
Yeah.
don't explore. So, what are the kind of things that you come across when you're working with couples in those differences?
So, what I would say is we tend to have one person in a couple that leads the finances.
Mm-hmm.
There's no right or wrong. So, that's one thing that I really want to get across. There's no right way to manage your finances as a couple or a wrong way.
Yeah.
People have to find what works best for them. And
Mm-hmm.
in some relationships, one person taking the lead and managing that side and then delegating other areas of the relationship or the family unit works perfectly. So there's no, like I say, one way that fits everybody, but it does cause a lot of contention between couples. And what I would say is the root cause of this is communication.
Mm.
And we learn a lot of how we work with money and how we feel about money from relationships that we have with our parents. So we
Okay.
learn about
Yeah.
money really early doors. And
Mm-hmm.
we have this tendency not to talk about money. I think particularly in the UK, we're quite standoffish about having that conversation about money and finances. It feels like
Yes.
quite um, a dirty topic for a lot of people. It's just not
Right.
a comfortable conversation. So that then leads into when we start a relationship and we probably don't have that conversation with money very early.
Mm.
And that can cause problems when you get further down the line in that relationship and you have that commitment together. All of a
Yes.
sudden, things start to become a bit more entwined. And that's when we start to see issues with people because they start to think, well, that's not the way that I do it, or I want to do this differently. But they've never had that conversation because it has been a bit of a taboo topic.
And this is very typical. So many things that crop up in the therapy room are things that people don't talk about before they decide to combine their lives together.
Yeah.
We don't sit down and have those conversations and talk about the practicalities. And, I guess, there's various types of relationships with money. There's, you come across the people where it's, money in, money out, and it just,
Mhm.
I've got what I've got. And then there's other people who love to save and plan. There's people who've got, think that's okay to have lots of credit. There's people who are very materialistic, so they want, to have nice things around them. There's other people that aren't bothered by that, so there's huge differences, isn't there, in how people approach money. And when you get one person who wants to kind of manage the finances really well, and another person who's a lot easier and
Yeah,
free. It'll all work out in the end.
yeah.
This can really cause a clash.
And it causes a lot of stress in relationships as
Yeah.
well, because when you do have that kind of yin and yang situation where one person is very free with it and the other person worries about it, what tends to happen is people keep that inside, and they kind of
Mm.
try and deal with that feeling and try and change the way that they think about money, but not really addressing that. They
Yeah.
just think, well, I'll just think differently, I'll think
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then it tends to come to a head with people. And then what could have been quite a small issue becomes a huge issue because we've sat on it, we've let it fester, we've let
Hmm.
it grow legs, which we all do in different ways and across different topics. But a lot of that is largely because we don't want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes with couples, the only time they talk about their finances is in that review meeting with me,
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
we all get around
Yeah.
the table and sit together. That can sometimes be the only time that they talk about money, which I don't think is the healthiest approach, because it does become a really big deal there. Whereas if we're having smaller conversations on a regular basis
Yes.
about smaller costs, so it doesn't have to be, making a big commitment to say taking on a bigger mortgage to move house. It doesn't have to
Mm.
be waiting until that big situation comes up. It can be as small as thinking, well, you know, we've been having a takeaway quite often lately.
Hmm.
Is that the
Hmm.
way we want to spend our money? So, like, smaller things can be dealt with, and that discussion can be had where people can get their point across without it becoming a huge deal.
And personally, I know that it's so important to talk about how you look after your money and how you want to share that. Because for me, second marriage, okay, I've got my own money hang-ups, but I don't have a joint bank account, and that was something that I had to have a conversation about. I did not want to go into that. I wanted to have my money, manage my money, and contribute, you
Yeah,
know, rather than have money together. But, for some people, there's expectations, isn't there, that
yeah.
that's just how it's going to be. We're going to have this joint bank account, but it's not always what people want. And then there's surprise, isn't there, if you don't
Yeah.
have those conversations.
I would say that it's really common in second marriages to keep the
Mm,
finances separate.
mm,
That's a really common way for people to deal with their money in that type of situation, because a lot of the time you want your own security, and that's
yes.
perfectly normal. Like I say,
Yes.
there's no lots of people will ask me, should we be doing it like this? Should we share all our money? Should we have our own accounts? How should we be looking at this? But like I say, there's no right or wrong way. It's about you both feeling comfortable,
Yes.
understanding where the other person is coming from, and sometimes understanding what that background narrative is. Because, like I say, we learn a lot from our parents. And if you've had a situation where money's been tight when you were younger, that was very much my upbringing. My mum was widowed,
Mm.
so money was very tight. We were very aware of how much we spent and
Mm-hmm.
what was important.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I married somebody that didn't come from that situation and money was never spoke about. So we did have to have that uncomfortable conversation about, you know, what is important to us when it comes to the finances? What are the non negotiables?
Yes.
And where do we both sit where we both feel comfortable moving forward?
And I think I would urge, again, with lots of different conversations, like you say, to have these conversations regularly, to
Yeah,
check in regularly. So, in my example, I was, I wanted separate bank accounts. That was fine because when I met him, I was the higher earner. Okay. So, I managed everything independently. We then combined the families. We had another child. I changed my working life so that I was no longer the higher earner, but I was holding on to this, I must be independent,
Yeah.
but my
Yeah.
actual income had gone down. And it took a lot for
Yeah.
me to say to him at one point, this is hard for me to manage now, contributing the way I want to contribute, where I'm not, we're not having any blended money at all, and so having to address your own stuff that's going on because life changes and having those conversations is so important.
And I think also we underestimate the cost of things. And what I
Yes.
mean there is not the physical cost, because we
Hmm.
know how
Hmm.
much a mortgage costs, we know how much utilities are, but what we don't appreciate is the cost of somebody picking the children up and dropping them off every day.
Right, right.
If you weren't able to do that, you would have to pay for somebody to do that. You have
Hmm.
to pay for wraparound care, which anyone with children out there in at a school age, wraparound care is expensive.
Oh, huge,
And
huge.
and getting the space in there as well, so there's lots of considerations that I don't always think we consider the financial aspect of it. So if there is a job that you would have to pay somebody to do if you didn't do it, there is a cost
Mm.
associated with it. So if there is one person that maybe works flexible hours or condensed hours in order to do those other jobs,
Yes.
yes, they might be bringing in less from an income perspective, but the value that they add to the relationship needs to be considered.
I
And I
love
don't
that.
we're
Yeah.
not always very good at understanding the value of a non-working parent or a part-time working parent.
That's a really, really good point that people, I think, don't consider. They look at the physical money that's going in
Yeah,
and out, but they don't look at the fact that, I do the school pickup and drop off. So I can't see clients for 2 hours of my
yeah,
day.
yeah,
So I can't bring, but actually, you're right. What we save, rather than paying somebody to go and do that. So there's all these nuances, isn't there? But
yeah.
people have their own relationships, and I know you wanted to touch on how do you work out like what your relationship is with money?
So a lot of it is driven by your upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got generations now where we've got, say, people in their 60s whose parents come from the war generation.
Mm.
That has a huge impact on how people feel about money.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's because that generation was very make do and mend, don't have debt. It was a very different generation when it came to spending money, because there wasn't the option out there to take on debt or spend on luxuries. They just didn't do that.
yes.
That hang up is definitely coming for that next generation who are in their 60s now, thinking about retiring,
Mm.
maybe coming into money through inheritance. It's very hard for them to shake that relationship that they have with money and that they've had for, say, 60 years, that was influenced by how their parents felt
Yeah,
about money.
yeah.
But the economy around us has changed, and we're
Mm-hmm.
understanding more that actually life is about living rather than just surviving.
Mm-hmm.
We don't
Mm-hmm.
want to do that. We don't live in communities anymore. So, like,
No.
we don't have that help with child costs and, looking after children in a community. So that's an added cost that adds into everything else. So it's very much looking at how you felt about money when you were younger and what you were exposed to. So, did you talk about money in your household, or was it a very taboo subject? Was it something that was never considered? Or did you ever have to manage your own money as a child?
Mm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, it's my daughter's birthday tomorrow, and she wants this Lego, and it's really expensive, and she's got some birthday money. But I've said to her that if she wants to buy the extra Lego, we need to look at a plan about, well, she can give some of her time that might be helping to tidy up or do a different activity, help her sister with something, just so she understands that there's a cost associated with everything in life, not always financial, but maybe a time cost. And it's a
Yes.
give and take relationship. It's not an ask and a get relationship, because that's not
Mm.
how things work when you get older and have your own responsibilities.
And I think the other thing to consider, you touched on it there, is expectations nowadays are different. So I was just chatting the other day about when I bought my very first house. So we were prepared to move out of our community to buy a house that was, yes, okay, I know house prices were a lot cheaper. I'm talking about buying a house for £34,000, which is unthinkable nowadays. But
Yeah.
we moved away to a cheaper area and we bought a house that was not like the house that we lived in with our parents.
Mm.
We
Yeah.
understand, so, but I do think nowadays, and I think social media plays into this, is, you
Huge.
know, when you're renting, there's this kind of expectation of what you're going to rent. Whereas in the past, maybe you understood that when you rented, it was probably, your first one was a bit of a dive and, and you
Yeah.
kind of make do and did. And then you bought a house and you kind of did it up. But I think we're with a generation now who have been brought up where their parents have been able to buy properties. They have lived, in some cases in nicer properties. And there's this expectation set of what you should be able to have and the lifestyle that you should have. And I see that in younger couples causing a lot of tension, because
Yeah.
they realize, or one of them might realize, that the expectations are out of reach.
Yeah, and I think that again comes back to that communication aspect. So it's
Yeah,
about what's important to you.
yeah.
And housing is a really big one. And I talk a lot about this when I'm talking clients through divorce, because a
Mm,
lot of the time, one party will want to keep the family home,
yeah,
especially if there's
yeah,
children.
yeah.
But it's about having that conversation about, well, actually, is it more important that you have this house and maybe the cash flow will be a lot tighter because
Hmm.
you'll have less outside of a property? Or would it be better for you to maybe reduce those expectations, maybe live in a smaller property or less of a garden, not the same area, but have more money to give you that opportunity to spend time with your children doing things or not work as many hours or whatever it might be? There's a trade-off to be had, and it really needs to be looking at what's important to you rather than what's important to other people looking in, because that's the trap that we
That's
fall into.
right. But that's really hard, isn't it? Especially when you are the partner who hasn't instigated the separation or the divorce, and
Yeah.
you've invested in your time, even if you haven't put as much money, you've invested your time in this lifestyle, in this home, and you
Yeah.
suddenly realize that through no choice of your own, you are
Yeah.
having to step away from that. So it takes time, doesn't it, to kind of
Yeah.
see that there might be a benefit, as you say, there might be something that's going to work better for you, because
Yeah.
that causes so much hurt. I see that a lot.
Yeah.
Mm,
Definitely. And it's very much thinking about the long term. So, what do you want your life to look like in the long term?
yeah,
Rather
yeah.
than thinking about now or thinking about what other people's perceptions of you are, which
Hmm.
are
Hmm.
irrelevant,
Hmm.
we should be thinking, what makes me happy and how do I facilitate that? And money doesn't make us happy in a way that having money in a bank account and being able to see that figure makes us happy. It's about what that money does for us.
Hmm.
And that's what we need to try and focus on.
So, Katie, we have been chatting for nearly half an hour. This time always goes so quickly. Thank you so much for giving your time. If you're watching this on whichever platform, Facebook or YouTube, you will see underneath details of how you can get in touch with Katie if you're interested in finding out more. I know Katie's done a number of lives for me in the past. I'm sure she'll be back as well. If you have got questions that you want to ask, please do pop them in there because we will be picking those up and coming back to you. So thank you so much, Katie, for your time today. It's a fascinating subject. It always brings up so many emotions, I know, for
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah.
I'm going to say goodbye to the Facebook people that we're live with, and I'm going to stop recording. So thank you, everyone. Take care.